I still remember the moment my entire philosophy crumbled before my eyes. It was 1964, and I was standing in my backyard in Oakland, my knuckles bleeding, my pride shattered into 1,000 pieces. I had just been challenged by Wong Jack Man, a traditional kung fu master who questioned everything I taught, everything I believed in. But here's what nobody tells you about that fight. It wasn't the physical confrontation that broke me. It was what happened 3 hours later, alone in my garage, when I finally admitted the truth I'd been running from for years. I was wrong, dead wrong, about my techniques, about my conditioning, about my entire approach to martial arts. In that moment of brutal honesty, I discovered something that would change not just my fighting, but my entire existence. The most powerful force in the universe isn't the ability to never make mistakes. It's the courage to look your failures dead in the eye and say 3 words that most people would rather die than speak. I was wrong. You know that feeling, don't you? That crushing weight in your chest when you realize you've messed up, when the evidence is staring you in the face, undeniable and unforgiving. Maybe it was a relationship you destroyed with your pride. Maybe it was a business decision that cost you everything. Maybe it was words spoken in anger that you can never take back. Whatever it was, you felt it. That moment when your whole world tilts sideways and you're faced with a choice that will define the rest of your life. Admit the mistake and face the consequences, or build a wall of justification so thick that even you start to believe your own lies. Most people choose the wall. They choose the comfort of being right over the power of being real. But what if I told you that this choice, this single moment of decision, is where legends are born or buried forever? Society has programmed you to believe that mistakes are the enemy, that admitting fault is weakness, that saying, "I was wrong," is equivalent to surrendering your power. They've trained you from childhood to hide your failures, cover your tracks, blame others, blame circumstances, blame anything except the person staring back at you in the mirror. But this programming isn't just limiting you, it's slowly killing the warrior within you. Every time you refuse to acknowledge a mistake, you're not protecting yourself. You're cutting off another piece of your soul. You're choosing the death of 1,000 small deceptions over the birth of authentic power. Let me tell you about the 3 deadliest mistakes that are destroying your potential, mistakes so subtle that most people never even recognize them as mistakes at all. The first is the mistake of perfection, not the pursuit of excellence, but the desperate need to appear flawless. I see it everywhere. People so terrified of being wrong that they stop trying anything that might expose their limitations. They choose safety over growth, comfort over truth, the illusion of competence over the reality of learning. This mistake doesn't just limit your progress. It slowly strangles your spirit until you become a walking statue of who you used to be. The second deadly mistake is the mistake of pride. Pride isn't confidence. True confidence can admit error without losing its foundation. Pride is that brittle shell that cracks at the first sign of fault. I've watched masters of martial arts, brilliant minds, gifted athletes, all brought down not by their lack of skill, but by their inability to say, "I need to change." Pride whispers that admitting mistakes diminishes you, but pride is a liar. Pride keeps you locked in patterns that stopped serving you years ago, defending positions that lead nowhere, fighting battles that you've already lost. The third and most insidious mistake is the mistake of isolation. When you refuse to admit your errors, you cut yourself off from the very feedback that could transform you. You surround yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear rather than what you need to know. You become an island of self-deception, drifting further and further from the truth of who you could become. This isolation doesn't protect you from pain. It guarantees that your pain will be meaningless, that your struggles will teach you nothing, that your failures will compound rather than educate. But here's what I discovered in that garage, bleeding and broken and finally honest with myself. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage isn't even the ability to face external enemies. True courage is the strength to face yourself without armor, without excuses, without the comfortable lies that have been protecting your ego from the truth. When I admitted that my training was incomplete, that my conditioning was inadequate, that my philosophy needed radical revision, something extraordinary happened. The weight I'd been carrying for years, the burden of maintaining an image of perfection, simply vanished. In its place came something I hadn't felt since childhood: freedom. The freedom to grow, to change, to become who I was truly meant to be. You see, admission of mistakes isn't about punishment. It's not about shame or self-flagellation or diminishing your worth as a human being. Admission is about alignment. It's about bringing your external reality into harmony with your internal truth. When you stop the exhausting work of defending the indefensible, all that energy becomes available for the work that actually matters, the work of transformation, the work of becoming who you're supposed to be rather than who you think you should be. I remember the exact moment this truth crystallized for me. It was 2 months after the fight with Wong Jackman, and I was completely redesigning my approach to martial arts. I had spent weeks breaking down every technique I thought I knew, questioning every assumption I'd made about combat. One evening, as I was working with my wooden dummy, I caught myself repeating an old pattern, a movement that I'd already proven to be ineffective. For just a moment, my old pride reared its head. The voice that said, "But you've always done it this way. This is your technique. You created this." And then I stopped. I looked at that wooden dummy and I said out loud, I was wrong about this too. And instead of diminishment, I felt expansion. Instead of weakness, I felt strength. Because in that moment, I chose truth over comfort, growth over stagnation, reality over the stories I'd been telling myself. This is the paradox that most people never understand. Admitting mistakes doesn't make you smaller, it makes you infinite. Every error acknowledged is a door opened. Every fault owned is a limitation transcended. Every moment of honest self-assessment is a step toward the person you're capable of becoming. But the courage required for this honesty, this is where most people falter. They think admission means defeat, but admission is actually the beginning of victory, real victory. Not the hollow triumph of being right, but the substantial satisfaction of being real. Let me share with you a story I've never told publicly before. In 1971, while filming The Big Boss, I made a critical error in judgment that nearly destroyed my entire film career before it truly began. I was so focused on proving my martial arts skills were authentic that I injured my co-star during a fight scene. Not severely, but enough to shut down production for 3 days. The director was furious. The producers were questioning whether I was worth the risk. My entire dream of bringing martial arts to the world through cinema was hanging by a thread. And in that moment, I had a choice. I could blame the choreography, blame the other actor for not knowing how to take a fall, blame the pressure I was under, blame the language barrier, blame anything and anyone except myself. The entire crew was watching. My reputation was on the line. Everything I'd worked for was at stake. So what did I do? I gathered everyone together, cast, crew, directors, producers, and I said the hardest words I'd ever spoken in public. This was my mistake. I let my ego control my technique. I forgot that real strength isn't about proving how powerful you are. It's about controlling that power in service of the greater good. I failed you all today, and I failed myself. But I promise you this, I will learn from this error, and it will never happen again. The silence that followed those words felt like an eternity, and then something beautiful happened. Instead of losing respect, I gained it. Instead of being seen as weak, I was seen as strong enough to tell the truth. That moment of admission didn't end my career. It launched it. Because people don't follow perfection. They follow authenticity. But admission alone isn't enough. The courage to admit mistakes must be paired with the wisdom to learn from them and the discipline to change because of them. This is where most people stumble. They admit their errors in moments of crisis, but as soon as the pressure subsides, they return to the same patterns that created the mistakes in the first place. True transformation requires what I call the 3 pillars of authentic courage: recognition, responsibility, and reconstruction. Recognition means seeing your mistakes clearly without the filters of pride or shame. It means developing the ability to observe your own actions with the same clarity you'd observe an opponent's movements. When I watch fighters in the ring, I can see their weaknesses immediately because I'm not emotionally invested in their ego. But seeing your own patterns, your own habits, your own recurring errors, this requires a different kind of vision. It requires the courage to step outside yourself and look at your life as if you were studying a stranger. Responsibility goes deeper than simply admitting fault. It means owning not just the mistake itself, but the conditions that created the mistake. It means examining the beliefs, the habits, the fears that led to the error. When I injured my co-star, I didn't just admit I'd been too aggressive. I examined why I felt the need to prove myself so desperately. I traced the responsibility back to my own insecurities, my fear of not being taken seriously, my need for validation. True responsibility means taking ownership not just of your actions, but of the internal landscape that shapes those actions. Reconstruction is where the real work begins. It's not enough to recognize and take responsibility for your mistakes. You must actively rebuild the parts of yourself that created the error. This means changing beliefs that no longer serve you, developing new habits that align with who you want to become, and most importantly, creating new patterns of response for similar situations in the future. When I reconstructed my approach to martial arts after that fight with Wong Jack Man, I didn't just change my techniques. I changed my entire philosophy. I moved from rigid adherence to tradition to fluid adaptation to reality. I rebuilt myself from the foundation up. Here's what I want you to understand about this process. Reconstruction isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming who you truly are, underneath all the mistakes, all the false beliefs, all the protective mechanisms you've built over the years. Think of a master sculptor working with marble. They don't add material to create the masterpiece. They remove everything that isn't supposed to be there. Your mistakes aren't flaws in your character. They're excess material that needs to be chipped away to reveal the masterpiece within. But let me warn you about something that will happen as you begin this journey of honest self-assessment. Resistance, not from others, though you'll face that too, but from yourself. Your ego will fight you every step of the way. It will convince you that admission is dangerous, that honesty is weakness, that changing course is surrender. It will whisper that your mistakes define you, that your errors are permanent, that growth is impossible. This resistance isn't your enemy. It's your teacher. Every moment of resistance is an opportunity to choose courage over comfort, truth over safety, growth over stagnation. I want to tell you about a practice I developed during my darkest period of self-reconstruction. I called it the mirror of truth. Every morning, before training, before work, before facing the world, I would stand in front of a mirror and ask myself 3 questions. What did I do wrong yesterday? What did I learn from it? How will I do better today? Not for anyone else, not for any external validation, but for the sake of my own integrity. This practice was brutal in the beginning. My ego would scream, would try to deflect, would offer 1,000 justifications and excuses. But gradually, over time, something shifted. The resistance faded. The honesty became natural. The growth became exponential. The beautiful thing about admitting mistakes is that it's contagious. When you have the courage to be honest about your errors, you give others permission to do the same. When you stop pretending to be perfect, you create space for authentic relationships. When you acknowledge your limitations, you invite others to share theirs. This creates a circle of truth that transforms not just you, but everyone around you. I've seen it happen in my classes, in my films, in my personal relationships. Yeah, authenticity breeds authenticity. The courage inspires courage. Truth liberates. Truth liberates. But here's the paradox that most people never understand. The more willing you become to admit mistakes, the fewer mistakes you actually make. Not because you become perfect, but because you become conscious. When you're no longer afraid of being wrong, you can afford to pay attention to what's actually happening, rather than what you wish was happening. When you're not defending your past decisions, you can focus on making better present choices. When you're not protecting your image, you can invest in your reality. I learned this lesson in the most unexpected way. During the filming of Enter the Dragon, there was a scene where I had to perform a particular technique that I'd never actually tested under pressure. My old self would have pretended confidence, would have powered through, would have hoped for the best. But my reconstructed self did something different. I stopped the entire production and said, I need to practice this technique until I can do it properly. I won't risk the integrity of this film by pretending to know something I don't. Director was frustrated. The crew was impatient, but I took the time to master the technique properly. When we finally filmed the scene, it was perfect. Not because I was perfect, but because I was honest about my limitations and willing to work within them. This brings me to one of the most important insights about mistake making. Your errors aren't random. They follow tandem. They follow patterns. They reveal themes in your character, gaps in your knowledge, areas where growth is most needed. When you start paying attention to your mistakes, rather than hiding from them, you begin to see these patterns. You start to recognize the early warning signs. You develop what I call mistake intelligence, the ability to catch errors before they become disasters. For me, the pattern was always the same. Pride would lead to overconfidence. Overconfidence would lead to carelessness. Carelessness would lead to mistakes. Once I recognized this pattern, I could intervene at any point in the cycle. When I felt pride rising, I could choose humility. When I noticed overconfidence building, I could seek feedback. When I sensed carelessness creeping in, I could increase my attention. The mistakes didn't disappear entirely, but they became smaller, less frequent, and far less destructive. Now let me share with you the most profound transformation that occurs when you master the art of admitting mistakes. You stop being afraid of failure. Failure. Not because failure becomes impossible, but because failure becomes useful. When you know that any mistake can be acknowledged, learned from, and integrated into your growth, failure loses its power to paralyze you. It becomes just another tool in your arsenal of development. This fearlessness doesn't make you reckless. It makes you bold. There's a difference. Recklessness ignores consequences. Boldness accepts them and moves forward anyway. I remember the moment this fearlessness fully crystallized in my consciousness. I was developing Jeet Kune Do, my personal martial arts philosophy, and I realized I was creating something that contradicted everything I'd been taught about traditional martial arts. The old Bruce Lee would have been terrified of criticism, would have hidden behind established authorities, would have played it safe. But the reconstructed Bruce Lee understood something different. If I was wrong about Jeet Kune Do, I could admit it and adjust. If I was right, I could change the world. Either way, I had to try. That's the gift of authentic courage. It doesn't eliminate risk. It makes risk bearable. Here's what I want you to practice, starting today. Starting today. The next time you make a mistake, any mistake, no matter how small, I want you to do something revolutionary. I want you to celebrate it. Not the mistake itself, but your awareness of it. Every recognized error is a victory over unconsciousness. Every admitted fault is a triumph over pride. Every acknowledged limitation is a step toward transcendence. This isn't about becoming comfortable with mediocrity. It's about becoming fearless in your pursuit of excellence. But let me be clear about something. Admitting mistakes isn't a one-time event. It's a way of life. It's a way of life. It's a daily practice of honesty, humility, and growth. It's choosing reality over fantasy, truth over comfort, evolution over stagnation. Every day will bring new opportunities to practice this courage. Some will be small, like admitting you were wrong about a minor detail. Some will be large, like acknowledging that an entire approach to your life needs to change. Each one is a chance to strengthen your authentic courage muscles. I want to tell you about the ultimate test of this philosophy. In 1973, I was at the peak of my career. Enter the Dragon was about to be released. I was finally achieving everything I dreamed of, and then my body started failing me. Back pain so severe I could barely walk, muscle spasms that would drop me to the floor without warning. For months, I refused to admit the severity of the problem. I pushed through the pain, medicated myself, convinced myself it was temporary. My old patterns of pride and denial were reasserting themselves, but then I remembered my own teaching. I remembered the power of honest admission, so I did the hardest thing I'd ever done. I admitted that I was broken. I acknowledged that my body was telling me something I didn't want to hear. I sought help, changed my training, modified my lifestyle. Did this admission save my life? I'll never know. It saved my integrity. The courage to admit mistakes isn't just about personal growth. It's about contributing to something larger than yourself. When you model authenticity, you give others permission to drop their masks. When you show that it's safe to be wrong, you create space for others to be real. When you demonstrate that growth is more important than image, you inspire others to choose development over defense. This ripple effect is how the world changes, one honest admission at a time. Think about the people who have most influenced your life. I'll bet they weren't the ones who never made mistakes. They were the ones who admitted them honestly, learned from them quickly, and grew because of them. They were the ones who chose truth over comfort, growth over stagnation, authenticity over approval. These are the people we trust, the people we follow, the people we become ourselves when we have the courage to be real. Here's your challenge for the next 7 days. Each morning, identify one mistake you made the previous day. Not to punish yourself, but to honor your humanity and your capacity for growth. Admit it honestly to yourself at minimum, to others when appropriate. Examine what led to the mistake. What beliefs, habits, or fears contributed to the error? What can you learn from it? How can you prevent similar mistakes in the future? And most importantly, how can this mistake serve your growth rather than your shame? Day 1, start small. Admit a minor error, something safe but honest. Day 2, go a little deeper. Acknowledge a mistake that affects your relationships. Day 3, admit an error in judgment, a decision that didn't serve you well. Day 4, recognize a pattern of mistakes, a recurring theme in your behavior. Day 5, acknowledge a mistake in your approach to something important, work, relationships, health. Day 6, admit a mistake about your own character, something you believed about yourself that isn't quite true. Day 7, look in the mirror and admit the biggest mistake of all, the mistake of pretending to be perfect when your power lies in being real. Remember, this isn't about becoming comfortable with failure. It's about becoming fearless in your pursuit of truth. It's not about lowering your standards. It's about raising your consciousness. It's not about accepting mediocrity. It's about transcending the limitations that mediocrity creates. Every mistake admitted is a wall torn down. Every error acknowledged is a door opened. Every moment of honest self-assessment is a step toward the person you're capable of becoming. The mirror doesn't lie, but it also doesn't condemn. When you look at yourself honestly, without the filters of pride or shame, you see not just your mistakes, but your magnificent potential. You see not just who you've been, but who you're becoming. You see not just your limitations, but your infinite capacity for growth. This is the true gift of authentic courage, not the ability to be perfect, but the strength to be real. Not the power to never fall, but the grace to rise every time you do. Stand now, find a mirror. Look into your own eyes and say these words. I am human. I make mistakes. I learn from them. I grow because of them. I am not perfect, and that is exactly why I am powerful. Feel the weight of pretense falling away. Feel the energy of authentic courage rising within you. Feel the freedom that comes from choosing truth over comfort, growth over safety, reality over the stories you've been telling yourself. Your mistakes are not your enemies. They are your teachers. Your errors are not your shame. They are your opportunities. Your failures are not your finish line. Your finish line, they are your starting blocks. The courage to admit mistakes isn't just forgivable. It's the foundation of everything great you will ever become. Be brave enough to be wrong. Be strong enough to admit it. Be wise enough to learn from it. Be bold enough to change because of it. This is the way of authentic power. This is the path of true strength. This is how legends are born, one honest admission at a time.